Today is a little bit different than we have had in the past, where we've had typically a panel answering questions. Today, we have a guest with us, and I'll introduce him in just a moment. For those who might not know, in the upper right-hand corner is Melissa Saden. Melissa will tell us what she's up to at the end of the conference. I want to give a lot of time to our guests today, so short introductions. And Melissa's from New Jersey, and we don't hold that against her. I have to throw something in for humor just to make myself laugh. In the lower right-hand corner is Jane Evans, and she comes to us from the UK. You might pick it up on her accent. That is not a Jersey accent, in case you're not from the East Coast. And these two ladies are experts in the field of trauma, childhood trauma, and I've had the pleasure of meeting them in person and talking with them extensively, I guess, and have enjoyed the webinars we've conducted up to this point. And again, up to this point, it's been information: what is childhood trauma, what is trauma, what does it look like, what does it look like at different grade levels. Today, we're talking about the how-to part. I got the concept, I want to change my school. And that's where our principal from the Cherokee Point Elementary School, part of the San Diego Unified School District, is with us today, Mr. Godwin Higa. And we're delighted to have you here today. I should let the audience know I could disappear. And if I do, it's because it's a storm. We've been threatened to have one all day long. I'm at the DC area, so whether it shows up or not, I don't know. But fair warning, it's possible to happen. So if it does, Melissa and Jane will take right over, and maybe Godwin will just keep going, and we'll just sit back and listen. So today is going to be a treat for us. Godwin, we've had parents and teachers, other educators asking questions beyond the what is, and it's how to. So I want to start out this question. First question with you is, what got you interested in trauma? And then you can tell us why you wanted to take it to a whole school level.
I guess it starts with your own personal experience. So I was brought up in a domestic violence situation when I was little, and I'm feeling really good about mentioning that, because I do that with my parents. I'm very honest about that, because I was the victim of that type of abuse, as well as being traumatized. So my goal as a principal, as a teacher, was to help identify and also look for ways to overcome and help others that have experienced trauma in their lives. So it started with there at that point. And then I realized that this is so important for student learning, because if a child is living with trauma, that is a huge part of not being able to learn the way we as educators want children to learn. And if the teachers and the principals and educators are not familiar or aware that trauma does affect learning, then we're in the wrong profession, and that we're not really doing justice to our students. So that's pretty much where I'm starting from.
And that makes a lot of sense. How interesting. So maybe the most difficult part, one of the most difficult parts, is having the leadership have a full understanding of what trauma is. And we know that in part of the training, it's essential to have leadership there to support whatever is done. What was the reception of staff? How did you, let me do it this way. How did you go about saying, folks, here's something I'd like to bring to the school?
Yeah. I guess as a teacher, I really believe in the treatment of students. And also, I believe that as teachers, we have to understand the whole child. So I started with understanding the whole child. And when I came to Cherokee Point, I've been here for about 7 years. It's in a very low socioeconomic area. There's 100% free lunch, Title I funding. Domestic violence is the highest in San Diego. There's gang activities, drug activities constantly in our neighborhood. And so when I came here 7 years ago, I realized that I needed to learn the community and find out what is going on in the community, my community. So I visited numerous homes, about 78 homes, to really get to know what's happening in the lives of my children. And so that opened my eyes a lot. So I said, teachers, we really have to understand the whole child. That means not only academically, but social-emotionally. We need to know where they're coming from and how we can help them. We can't just assign homework and put a grade to it, thinking that they're going to come back and do their homework. We cannot just allow children to stay home and not ask the questions, what's wrong with you, or what can we do to help? So from then on, for about 3 years, we practiced understanding the whole child. The first thing I wanted them to understand was there's a book from M. Johnson on understanding poverty. And when people don't understand poverty, it's a very different way of life and understanding for people that's not in poverty. So we studied that book as a team. Also, we wanted to make sure that we're not only looking at academics and grading kids just based on standardized testing or just testing per se, but really understanding what can we do to help the child progress. So I tell my teachers, I'm not interested in standardized testing because it's a snapshot of their knowledge. I'm more interested in the progress of the student. How, from this point to this point, how did they get there, and what are you doing to help the child? So we practiced understanding the whole child for about 3 years, and then Jane Stevens from Ace to High and the Huffington Post heard about Cherokee Point and called me and said, can I come to your school and interview your parents and your teachers, because I think your school is trauma-informed school. And I said, sure, come on down. So she spent about 3 days here. And at the end of her third day, after interviewing all these people, she said, Godwin, you have a trauma-informed school. So let me educate you on this. So I went into Ace to High websites and I read about it and really learned. And I said, you know what, this is truly what we're practicing. But we didn't know the medical part. What is the impact of the brain? So when we met with when I met with the teachers, we had professionals come in and really talk about what happens to the brain when a child is traumatized, and what happens in the future if we don't help and look for interventions and preventative measures. So that was really great. We had an article out, and it's in the Ace to High website about the school, and that was the start of it.
I'm going to ask the ladies to ask some clarifying questions, because they really are the experts, and I think you'll ask the questions I won't think of that are going to help the audience. But I do want to remind the audience as well that you can post questions that we'll share with the panel here. It's on the lower right-hand side. Please feel free to do that. And remind folks, too, that this is being recorded. And anybody who has signed up will be notified when the recording is available. I'm going to ask you to give us at least a week to get that back to you. Okay, Melissa and Jane, was there anything that so far with what Godwin has said, that not jumping ahead, but that you want to ask for more information that might help our listeners?
Yeah, what's really interesting for me, I was just thinking that's so fascinating that you came to the science at the end, kind of in a way, in the process, because when I deliver training, I always hope that that's the bit that wins people round. You know, so I think that if I can't get their empathy up in a day, bearing in mind I only have a day, so I normally start by helping them work out what do we even mean by trauma, and then the next thing I look at is the neuroscience and the neurobiology, and then I look at attachment and relationships, and then I introduce the idea of, so now you know all that stuff, you will want to be really kind to these children, won't you? And we look at that as an alternative to rewards, consequences, and praise and all that stuff that we know is not so helpful. So it's interesting to me that you started with poverty, which makes sense. But the end point for you, maybe it just happened that way, was to look at the science. Do you think in hindsight it would have been more helpful to start with the science, or I'm just really curious to know?
I think the term trauma-informed is so new to so many people that once they understand what it actually means and what the causes are and so forth, like what we did with the teachers, we understood the whole child. We have 0 suspensions at this school for the last 3 years. We practice restorative justice and practices. But we didn't really get into the neuroscience, and they're craving for more information and all that. So we got a doctor from the San Diego State University to talk about the effects of trauma in the brain. And that really opened the eyes of all the staff and myself to really understand and know that this is really happening to these children, and it made us even work harder to make sure that the kids are taken care of. So you're right. It could have been better if we went the other way around.
I'm just curious. You know, that's my curiosity, because although I'm not a scientist, I didn't think I was scientific. Now I like my science first, and then I'm good to go. Then you've got me. Show me the science and I'm all over it. So I was interested whether you thought maybe it might have been helpful, you know, if you could wave a magic wand and go back. But I mean, you came to it in such a fantastic way. I love that you looked at the whole child, and so it's more for my learning. Do I keep doing it the way I'm doing, just because I like it that way, or should I be guided by you?
And because of that, I'm gonna do a little activity for everybody. This is about neuroscience, and this is how I open all my conferences with. You see this sheet of paper? You can do that with your own. My kids drew these stick figures, and all these stick figures, kids are smiling. So what I want you to do is start crumpling up the paper. And as you're crumbling it up really tightly, you're saying all the mean things that people say to each other. You're ugly, you're stupid. Kids say all these mean things, and parents too. So when I do this with the parents, think about what other parents are saying to the kids or adults in domestic violence, and squeeze it really tight and really say those mean things and thoughts. Now I want you to do is unravel the paper. And as you're unraveling, I want you to say all these beautiful things. You're smart. You're so talented. You're so beautiful. I love the way you look. And what I want you to do is keep on trying to take all these creases off, and take it all off. But when you look at it, you see all these little creases? That's what happened to your brain. It can never be taken away, but there's things that we can do to prevent and to train resilience. And so this is such an impactful thing, and I learned this from understanding the neurological effects of this. Yeah. And this is for life. You know, the creases are for life. So this is what I start my conferences with, so that they understand that this is all trauma that kids and adults go through.
That's great. I love it.
I'm going to be using that. Thank you, Godwin. That was terrific. I also want to echo what Jane said and applaud you for treating the whole child. And what you said earlier is something that the three of us have said from the beginning of our webinars. Ask what's happened to this child, not what's wrong with this child. And you were doing that before you knew it was trauma-informed. And Jane, in answer to yours, I think honestly we have to meet people where they are, because I was just working with a school district in Western New Jersey who does a lot with social emotional learning. So when I spoke to the principal and the teachers about what they were doing, they were trauma-informed, and they just didn't know it. So then I explained the brain research and the light bulbs going on around the room, because it was giving them the basis for what they saw and were recording and knew to be true. So I don't know that there's any wrong or right way to come to this. And as Godwin said, trauma-informed is such a new term. And so people might be trauma-informed and not know it.
Yeah, it's good. Some of the schools I go into, they don't know they haven't even thought about this stuff. They know that maybe what they're doing is not
Right.
kind to the children, but they have not really thought any further than that. And they haven't looked necessarily at the community. They haven't thought in a very holistic way. They just want to understand the children, but to stop the behavior. So that's sometimes, and it's very hard in the UK to get into the schools.
So, you know, one of the things that is always brought up in meetings and when people visit the school, we have a lot of visitors wanting to see it for themselves. And they would ask, how do you do this? You know, what are some of the tricks? And I always tell them that teachers and administrators, when dealing with children and parents, you have to lead with compassion. And a lot of people don't understand what compassion is. They think, oh, be nice to people and all that.
Yeah.
But compassion is way deeper than that. It's not even empathy. It's about, as a person, how do you look at a human being? And is this what you want and I always say, do you want your child to experience all this mean teachers and words that come out of people, the cafeteria workers or whoever that deals with children? Do you want your child to be subjected to that? So a lot of visitors that come here, they don't really understand what it means to lead with compassion as a teacher, administrator, parent. So we do a lot of training on compassion work, because until I know you as by name, but if I sat down with you and we talked about family and we talked about some of the things that happen in your lives, that is a true connection. And we lack that. As teachers, we lack that. We might sit in the lunchroom and talk about other students and all that, but we tend to not talk about relationship building and how do we practice compassion with each other. So,
Godwin, let me ask you a question. If you go into a school and you spend a couple of hours, you start to get you get a superficial, but you get a sense of the school. How would your school differ from another elementary school that wasn't trauma informed? Or what would be different that I would feel or sense or see or hear? Or is there nothing and it's just...
There's a lot of indicators that I'm really proud of. First, we practice restorative justice. So when the kids are sent to the office with an altercation from recess, and we're all humans, kids are humans too, and they get into trouble. And if you looked at the video, we do the circles and we ask them, why do you do this? And we try to get the students to touch each other's heart by saying, look, this is how she's hurting. Look what you did. You know, what can we do to repair this? Things like that. So when you go to recess, 95% of the time the kids are like playing and they're having fun, but they should be. And then the 5% might be students that are really struggling with the really tense, it's called toxic stress that they go through. So we spend more time on that. So one of the things that, like for instance, after we studied this, we had a survey with all parents and teachers on how do you think discipline should happen in the school? So there were questions to teachers. 97% of the teachers said they'd rather have students, before they even knew about trauma informed, because we were practicing understanding the whole child, 97% said, I'd rather them work it out together. I do not want to send the students to the principal, because that's not, we can't send kids home. There's no way I'm gonna suspend kids and then they're roaming the streets in what we have out here. And I've experienced that. Before we had a policy where we had to suspend kids for all these silly things. We were making policy changes on that. We want to advise and show procedures and policies that will be more humane and not, what we did was we eliminated the minor disruptions. where in I was a secondary principal as well before this, where teachers and administrators would look at the child and says, I told you to take your hat off when you enter my room. Go to the office and you're suspended for minor disruptions. That has been eliminated in Los Angeles School District and Long Beach School District, and now we're changing our procedures here. But to answer your question, we just had the superintendent of the second largest school district in California come and visit the school. And she, after we visit the school on instruction and looking at the school for 2 hours, she sat down and we were debriefing, and she said, you know what, Godwin, I noticed something so different with Cherokee Point versus a lot of schools that she visited. And I said, oh, what is it? She goes, your children, your students, look at their visitors right into their eyes and they smile and they welcome you. They're happy. They have this happy feeling in them. And that is so different from what I've seen. So kudos to your staff and the students, because this is exactly what we want. With all these new testing coming up, we have to prepare students with their environments and their social and emotional state, so that they would then be prepared to take any type of test and not fear of failing.
Right.
Melissa, did you want to add something there? I know you had a big smile on your face when you were listening.
Yeah, he's a walking and talking version of all of the research I'm doing for my dissertation.
Oh, wow.
And so it's so nice to, it's one thing to read the numbers all the time and hear the experts, the neurologists, the sociologists talk about why these things should be true. And it's so refreshing to hear, in fact, that you came from the other side of this, first of all, as a survivor yourself. But what you're describing right there is attachment and trust, and things that Jane and Vaughn and I have talked about to our audience before, which is you have to develop relationships. So if you lead with compassion, as you're saying, that's what you get, is even children who are currently being traumatized at home come to your school, know they're safe, and have the ability to look someone in the eye. It's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good for you.
We all recognize that one for sure. You touched on policy change, and I know Melissa is making changes in her school district on some of the very issues you're talking about. Did you have any kind of difficulty making the changes before the district did, or are you leading the district in changes district-wide in terms of discipline? And I can see you're smiling. You've got lots to say here.
Yeah, we actually started with the student services at the district and met with the director and said, suspension doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And we have a suspension policy that for every little thing, even the form that we fill out is so punitive. And we're not looking at prevention and interventions versus just sending them home or having them go to a different school because they're expelled for fighting and all that, but we're not addressing the cause of their actions. And so we convinced the school district policy makers to look at, especially the expulsion, where there's a ed code with why we suspend kids for zero tolerance type measures, but there were like 10 or 9 other ways to expel a student that was human created other than the ed code, teachers or staff or somebody. So the Board of Education just wiped those 9 out and said, we're going to stick with the ed code only. So that was a big step. We also got rid of many of the minor disruption suspensions. And if a principal or a teacher want to or feel like the child should be suspended, or the vice principal feels that way, they would have to show the district and the suspension board numbers of interventions that was done before you decide to suspend the child. So that was a big step for the Unified School District to address that. And so I totally believe in that type of. The other thing is I was appointed by the mayor as a human relations commissioner. And one of my other colleagues is a gang commissioner, gang violence commissioner. So what we did was we want to do statewide and citywide policy changes to educate the public about trauma-informed and restorative justice practices. So what we ended up doing was we wanted to create a summit on this for the city workers, and then it now grew to the county workers, and now it became the region of San Diego. Going to come to a summit to look at trauma-informed and restorative justice practices, because we believe that everyone needs to understand what trauma-informed, because you know those things when you go to the DMV and you're standing in line and you're waiting and waiting and you get to the counter and you're treated like, wow, what do you want? Things like that. They need to know what trauma-informed is, because they don't know who's approaching the counter. So things like that. We made some policy changes with the Board of Supervisors. We had our student leaders talk about domestic violence and the pledge about hitting and reporting. So they went in front of the County Board of Supervisors meeting with hundreds of people there, and the president of the Board of Supervisors made a pledge and then did a decision to have all county health workers take the course on trauma-informed. So there's a lot of things that can happen to promote the treatment of people, human beings.
I love that you're recognizing the community, that this can't happen in a classroom or in your office, that it is the school and it's a systemic, and we mean systemic. It is the outside culture. And Jane has hit me with this a million times. What we're doing is not treating individual kids, we're treating all kids. And I love to hear that concept. And Melissa, I've mentioned that you're making some changes in your school district in terms of discipline as well. One of the things that I want to question, and maybe both of you, is if I could remember what I wanted to ask you, and I totally went blank. But it was a great question.
It'll come back.
Oh, I hate that.
I would love to ask, because I mean, I've, like Melissa, I've been saying this stuff for such a long time. We all have to become trauma informed, and in our communities, just everywhere. This is not them and us. This is everybody. Everybody has experience, even the teeny weeny, and people get very angry when I say this, but most people have experienced like a light brush of trauma by the time they get to 18. So this is not a them and us. Some people have a bucket full, some people have several bucketfuls, but this benefits everybody. We know that from the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. So I love this, and it's very encouraging, because people try and shut me down and they get quite angry with me because I talk about trauma all the time. And, I say this is trauma with a small t. This is the dripping tap of trauma. I'm not talking about, we know that domestic violence is a terrible, terrible thing. And, children do not just get over it, as many people still believe. Oh, it happened when they were 1. You can't tell me an 8-year-old, you can't use that excuse. But luckily we have the science for that now. But there's still so much resistance. I'm fascinated by how you got the ball rolling in such a way, because, as I say, people are always literally trying to shut me up because they're middle class and they're this and they're that, and we don't have trauma. Yeah, you do. Actually, if you're really denying it, you probably got the most. So, it's like...
I had a superintendent, Jane, tell me once that after I explained, I gave him my pitch on trauma, he said, well, that's, probably 3 kids in my school. Statistically, no, it's more like 40%.
Yeah, and we just had the NSPCC here just did a report, their annual report on how children are, and they've discovered that reported cases of neglect in the UK are at a 10-year high. Isn't that shameful? Now we know what we know. You know, this is like 10 years ago, we didn't even know all this stuff like we do now. But, you know, I feel ashamed to live in a country where things are getting much worse, given that we know the gravity of this and the long-term implications.
Speaking of the community, and Vaughn, this might be a question you were going to ask. Godwin, we know that trauma can be generational, and that if you are, as I loved your paper demonstration, but so the wrinkles in your paper are forever. And even if you are resilient and manage to, you know, get married and have a relationship and have children, you still are a survivor, an adult survivor of that childhood trauma, now raising children. So I'm wondering what your school's connection with your parents is, the parents of the students in your school, because they're living in this community that you said it has got a very high rate of
We're very lucky to get the support from the California Endowment. It's a foundation in California that support wellness in the communities. So we got a grant from them. But what the grant is promoting is trauma-informed schools, but more importantly, how do we extend trauma-informed and restorative justice into the mid-city area, which is the highest crime area and domestic violence and so forth. But one of the things that we decided to do, the grant is now going on to its 5th year. They believe in what we're doing. They really want to spread this California-wide. But one of the things that we really wanted to focus on is exactly what you said about how do we break that cycle. And one of the things that we realized, what it has to be parent educated into this type of trauma-informed practices so that then they can break that cycle with the children. So we have 40 parent leaders. Many of them will become, are now training other parents in different schools about trauma. Mm-hmm. They also have trauma sessions where they learn more about trauma. They talk about it. So they have their own focus groups to talk about some of the things that they went through as children and then adults, and talk about what's happening with their abuse and so forth. But more importantly, they're becoming educated in how do you become resilient. And so the best way to do, to change is education. So I always tell my parents at all my meetings, knowledge is power. Say it 5 times, knowledge is power. And they chant it. And so they realize really quickly that that's true. As what I know now is so different, and you saw it in the video. The parents in the video were hurt so badly that, you know, I can't tell you confidential information, but by just sitting there, I'm bawling because I'm thinking, wow, the empowerment that happened. Now these parents are going to go and tell other parents how to break that cycle. It's not going to happen right away, but guess what? 10 years from now, those kids are going to know that mommy loved me and daddy loved me, and I didn't get punished for silly stuff, but I was counseled and nurtured in that way. So yeah, we have a very strong parent group that's now moving out towards the community to spread and plant those little seeds so that we can have a lot of growth going on.
To our audience, I just want to clarify, Godwin references Aces Too High, which is a website, all one word, acestoohigh.com. And if you go there and in the search, if you put Cherokee Point Elementary School, Godwin's article will come up about his school, but there's now a video too, and you can see Godwin interacting with the parents and the children. That's how I hunted you down. But it's really comforting to see it. You can almost feel it in the video. Your leading with compassion comes through very clearly.
Yeah. And it is so vital. You know, I think sometimes in the school system, because there's so much pressure on teachers and schools, and that they don't have time to bring the parents in. You know, it's too much. But you're never, as you said, you're never going to change anything until the parents have this knowledge. And when I work with parents, I always give them an explanation of the brain. In maybe the second session I do, and I have a model where I explain the brain using a meerkat for the survival brain, and an elephant for the emotional memory, the limbic system, and a monkey for the clever cortex. And then we just talk about, you know, when you have a lot of difficulties when you're a child, you have a very reactive, active meerkat brain, and that pops up. And, you know, meerkats keep you alive, but they're not very clever. And, you know, they get very stressed, and they're not meant to be popped up all the time and running around and, you know, scared. They're just supposed to very occasionally do that. And the monkey's supposed to be in charge. And then they start having a whole different dialogue with their children, and they start looking at, you know, I talk about the baby meerkat, and you're the mummy meerkat, and you're the daddy meerkat. And, you know, when the baby meerkat's done something, if your meerkat pops up, then it's going to go, wow! And they're like, oh, yeah, I get that, you know, and that is what happens. And I feel my meerkat going up now. And, you know, we have sessions where we just talk all about meerkats. But, of course, they then have neuroscience, and they warm to the baby meerkat that they're nurturing, and how they've got to stroke it and use rhythm to soothe it. And, you know, it just gives them something really simple to get up and go, but we've talked about the brain. And I find that really accessible and effective, and it brings everybody together in a common meerkat caring situation then, which, yeah, you know, I really believe that parents first and foremost need this information, because they're the ones that are with the children all the time.
We could ask, I've got 50, I always have 50 questions. These talk, I have even more. Godwin, one of the questions that had come up previously, and again, I'm letting the audience know, please post your questions, was what do you do for the educator who's not interested in what you've got to say? And you know that going into it. How do you turn their thinking around?
You know, when I became a principal 17 years ago, I believed in my heart that teachers have to respect students, and students need to respect teachers. And so one of the things when I became a principal is I set some non-negotiables for staff, that they are not to treat students with disrespect, and the students would not treat the teachers, and that was my job to nurture and help the student. But mean-spirited teachers, a lot of teachers should not be in the profession. And I learned that as an educator, coming from the classroom to the, and new teachers know who they are, that should not be teachers. And so when I became a principal, I knew who to work with, and it's not, the non-negotiable was you're not going to treat kids mean. And there's union contracts and so forth. But one of the things that I had to do was sit in the classroom daily to protect the students from the verbal abuse that happens. So it was more about working with the teacher to be more compassionate with students versus just trying to document and get rid of them. Because I believe that all teachers have that part of, we're educators, so they can learn the right way to treat people. So it was a struggle at that time, but what you can never lose a battle with parents and students and the community when you're saying you are not going to treat students with disrespect. I mean, that is a given. And parents would come to me and say, this teacher is being really mean to my child. And my procedure in that case is, I would say, have you spoken to the teacher? Yes. Okay, so let's have a meeting. So the three of us or the four of us would sit, have the parents say their piece, and then the teacher will then have to explain. So the triad, or when we have those meetings, is very effective because it becomes a restorative justice type circle where the teachers then would apologize, or the parent would say, you know, I know I shouldn't be listening to everything what my child say because sometimes it doesn't come out the right way or line. So those are some of the things that happens, but there's always some educators, and I'm not saying just teachers, but educators, vice principals, principals, and people from the district still does not have that philosophy, but it's the power of the parents that I know that they're supporting my philosophy because they know that's right for kids, that will pressure others to do the same. And it's all about the pressure that people will get, unfortunately, to change the way they treat people.
And to all of the teachers listening, if you want to know exactly how to interact with your children, Godwin just demonstrated the way Godwin discussed dealing with a difficult teacher who's not ready to change is the way you can deal with children in your classroom who aren't ready to treat people with respect. It's compassion.
How do you deal with, because I went in and trained one school and they got so angry with me, not all of them, but some of the support staff who on a daily basis are being spat at and having chairs thrown at them, and they really wanted me to give them some ultimate mean weapon against these children. And even though I did all the brain and I did the meerkat and I did all my best tricks, their own trauma was very apparent, and several of them got very, very upset and very frustrated with me because I kept saying that we always have to be compassionate and kind to the children, and we have to sort ourselves out, and we have to find that within us. And it was the only time I've ever done training where I nearly had to leave because they got so upset with me, which was really sad to see. Because they obviously, had their own trauma and frustration, and people are still looking for the ultimate weapon, I feel.
And I think that this is a huge paradigm shift for many because they were brought up with punitive consequences. So the only way to deal with discipline is to be punitive. So I don't blame them for being ignorant on that, because it takes so much. Like one person asked me, how do you do it? And I said, well, if the entire school is feeling that way, that you have to work in a school with fear, like you're going to listen to me and I'm going to do what I say. You're going to do, the principal is saying, you're not going to do that. No, and there's a screaming and yelling. It doesn't take overnight to do what you're trying to do. So my comment is, let's start with the pre-K. Get those parents educated in this. Get the kids learning how to be more compassionate with each other. And so we have a San Diego State University have 30 early child education students that come to the school, and they work throughout the week with the pre-K and the kindergarten classes so that they can learn how they can teach others and become a preschool or early childhood educator with compassion and learn trauma-informed and all that. So it doesn't take overnight, but it also means that if you have a school with a small percentage that feel that trauma-informed or restorative justice or compassion behavior is the way to go, start together by yourself so that they can see the evidence, because they will not change until they see it happening in your class. And have the principal come and say, I don't want to send my kids to you anymore. I'm not going to, the referrals that I get right now, it's about, Mr. Higa, this child needs shoes. Mr. Higa, can we help this family with clothes? And so what I did for the teachers was, teachers are there to teach and educate students. So the best thing to do for administrators is to take all that other stuff off the plate of teachers. And guess what happens? When we start giving them support, we have a Project Impact counseling center here that I went and got a grant from one of the community foundations. And so 2 interns from San Diego State are trauma-informed counselors, because the teacher said, we're practicing trauma-informed. We ask the students, what can we do to help? But there are students that are really, they have the toxic stress that they're trying to deal with. I don't have the knowledge or the expertise in dealing with that. So we went and got 2 experts to come in and say, you know what, if you feel that the child is has severe stress, then let's refer them to the counseling center where they can deal with that. So as we move forward, we cannot, I was a teacher myself, so I know that there's so many things coming your way. So to the administrators that are listening, we have to support the teachers in that way, but then know that it can't change right overnight. Like what you wanted to walk away, but yet you felt so terrible that what can I do with these angry people? But it's because of not knowing what's right for kids, and that if they start becoming compassionate and working with kids, they're going to see an overnight change with some of those students, and it doesn't take overnight.
Thank you.
No.
I want to hit 2 things. One, to the audience, we're not saying that the majority of teachers are mean and horrible people. We're not. It's like anything else. One bad child in a classroom is what your focus is on, and sometimes it feels that there are more than there are. That's not the case, and it's very much, it's nothing worse than having somebody who's difficult to deal with in the HR department. That's not where you want to find these kind of folk. So it's reminiscent of the DMV. The other thing is that you've got kids you're now a feeder school, and they're going to move on to another setting. Are you working with the receiving school now to transition the kids over? Maybe you could talk a bit about that.
Me? Okay.
Oh, yes.
What we're doing is we're moving on to the middle school with our youth leaders who went through this type of philosophy and practices. And it was so refreshing to hear that one of my colleagues who became a principal at a high school, neighborhood high school in this area, very challenging school. When he got there, it was 300 suspensions in their records.
Wow.
And then he presented at our meeting last year and said, you know, I've been following Godwin in his school and really learning about trauma-informed and restorative justice, and I believe in what he's doing. And he brought it down to 67 suspensions in 1 year.
Wow.
By getting the support, investing in counseling, training the teachers about trauma-informed, doing all of that. And then just last month at our monthly meeting, he stood up and said, I want to announce to all of you, this is the end of the year, we brought our suspensions down to 85%. We got rid of them. We don't believe in that. So that was a great step to hear that the neighborhood schools are finally getting to understand what's important for kids. So yes, we're trying desperately to spread this to everyone.
Ladies, I got one more question. I'm watching the time here. One of the problems I've experienced, and I'm sure you all have because you've been in the business long enough, is the issue of sustainability. If you're the leader and you leave, I mean, it can happen at a state level as well, in a district. What do you do to ensure that the system will continue? Or what have you done? I can't imagine you haven't thought about this.
So we started with the educators. The school is going on their 10th year next year, and we have very little movement, meaning that teachers do not want to leave. And so that is one way to sustain our philosophy, and they believe in it. One of the things that most important is the parent leaders. So we kind of get those parents that have preschool kids, so they're with us for 7 years, and try to work strategically so that it continues that way. And then we're also moving to expand this to the community. So we have in our new proposal, we're creating 6 positions. It's called cultural navigators. So the parent leaders who's been working with trauma-informed restorative justice and policy changes will now have a title and be paid, partially paid for their work, and they become experts of those areas. So we have an advocacy navigator where they're going to really look at policy changes. There's going to be a cultural navigators to work on the Obamacare type issues that people are not being insured, things like that. So those are all sustainable positions where it can grow into actual jobs with different community organizations where they want navigators with that language and understanding.
I think that's great. Good. Yeah, I would hate to see a system terminate because you left or a lead teacher was to leave. And what you're saying is now this is part of the community, and their involvement here is going to be training new people and moving forward.
But before we leave, I wanted to talk to the people that are listening and the educators, the parents, and whoever is listening. And I always bring this up at anywhere that I go. But one of the really great things that's happening today, actually, I went to Baltimore and spoke at the symposium with Johns Hopkins University. There was about 800 participants, and did this presentation like similar to what we're doing here with a PowerPoint. And one of the professors who led this from Johns Hopkins asked if I would go and visit a school because he was interested in promoting something like this to the neighborhood school. And it's a joint effort school that it's called Henderson Hopkins K-8 school. So we went to the school, met with the principal and their staff. They were so excited about the video and what we were sharing with them. They want to duplicate something like this in Baltimore. And the one social worker is here today. He arrived at 11 o'clock to tour the school and understand what is trauma-informed. Like we said, people don't really understand there's more than just a term, but there's all these different components. And so one of the things that we're going to do is in July, we're going to have 5 staff members from the school join us for 4 days to talk about the school, meet with the teachers, parents, students, so that can happen. But before I end here, I wanted to really stress that I looked up the suicide rates of the United States, and the number 1 suicide rate in the United States is age 84 and above. The second is 64 and above. And the third highest suicide rate is 14 to 24. So if you're asking why this is so important to all of us, it's because we're saving lives. And the reason why our 14 to 24 kids are killing themselves is because the sense of hopelessness. And that can change. Hopelessness can change with the help and interventions and preventions that we can supply with grants or the state. I'm waiting for Michelle Obama to invite me to the House so that I can promote this, and I know you want to do that. But think of all the people 84 and below, 64 and below, and 14 below. If they were treated with respect and they understand that they went through this traumatic experience, then they have hope. They will not kill themselves. So if you look at the CDC reports and you find out all these people killing themselves because of the sense of hopelessness, there's hope with us promoting something like this. And it's so important that teachers, educators, parents know that. And, I always bring this up when I was at the middle school. As a principal, I brought this up with the 6th grade parents, hundreds of them. The school had 1,400 kids, and I said, you cannot leave your kids. They're killing themselves. You have to understand your child and be with them forever. So after all of this talk and everything, I think that it's really important to know that we are saving lives by educating people and making them understand and realize that this is really important work.
Excellent. Godwin, next time you're out in the D.C. area, let me know. I'd like to catch up with you and meet you.
Thank you.
D.C. is Baltimore. I mean, it's a large area here. Thank you. Again, before we close out, I want to give everybody a chance. And how do we reach you or learn more information? And Godwin, if we want to learn more about what's happening in your world, where would we go?
I would go to the website Age Too High, and they have the video and also articles about how we started and what we're doing currently. So they're keeping up with us. We did have just 2 weeks ago, the California Endowment is now going to fund another filming video on the parent leadership portion of how other systems can look at and schools can use that as a model, and also the youth leadership program that we have here where we're training kids about trauma-informed and how to be resilient and all that. So, and then we're also going to have another film on the founder of ACES, as well as videos of different community leaders and how they feel about the trauma-informed. So 3 videos are being funded, and we're going to be, hopefully by next year, you'll see more of that on there. So my name and address and everything is on that site.
Excellent. Okay, Melissa, I know you're up to good stuff. How do we reach you, or how do we learn about what you're doing? What are you doing in the next couple of
Well, I am continuing to hammer away at my dissertation, and I have written some articles recently published by Adoption Today, and I am pursuing a few grants from the state of New Jersey to spread trauma awareness, and I am working in the community that I live in to do exactly what Godwin was saying. The teachers need support from county health organizations because teachers are not counselors. Teachers are teachers. And all of those wonderful child service departments working seemingly in isolation out in our counties need to be hand in hand with our schools. And in my county where I live, we have been having meetings about what that might look like.
Excellent. And I want to thank you for finding Godwin.
My
good to have
pleasure.
a researcher among us here.
It's completely selfish. I was dying to talk to him.
Great. Jane, I know you have some cool things that just happened.
Yeah, I've had 2 very exciting, I've just given book birth to my, I can't work out.
That's good. We can see
There
it.
you go.
Yep.
Don't move it. That's great.
My baby, my kitten just came to join Baby Bear. So that's just come out with Jessica Kingsley, and it's for children who've grown up with, well, Godwin and Melissa will be very familiar with children who grow up with adults who are emotionally absent in their lives. So they may meet their physical needs, but there's no emotional interaction, which for a young child is very traumatic. And the other thing I have, which actually officially comes out tomorrow, is a pack of cards which are for practitioners to use with parents who have experienced their own trauma. And it's based on the work that I do, and it's 48 questions in different sections so that practitioners definitely ask parents about their early childhood, that they definitely ask about their pregnancy, about the birth, so that they gather the right information, so then they understand the parent's trauma and the child's trauma. So this is something that I desperately wanted to do to give to practitioners. So yeah, I'm really had a very exciting week.
It's been great to see the postings on the internet. And if you want to reach Jane, you can just type her name into the Google system, and she pops up all over the place. So yeah, even if you don't have anything.
If you put trauma next to Jane Evans, then I will appear.
We'll do it the easy way. Real fast, I had shared with some people earlier that, I had written a book, When the School Says No, How to Get the S, which is really a book on collaboration and fits nicely with our conversations here, because you can't make changes by negotiating. These are children's needs, and if they need them, then the services should be provided. That's the concept of the book. But I was working with the district, talking to them about that book and training their staff on how to collaborate with parents. And I just thought I'd throw it out there and see what I could, you never know, brought up this topic. And the person I was speaking to said, no, I'm not familiar with the term, but then he was talking about brain research. I said, well, it's that and a little bit more. And he said, could you come back and talk about that too? And I thought, yeah, I said, I've got a great bunch of people that could work with you. So you let people know, and they are interested, even if they don't know the terms. To our audience, I want to thank you for attending. There is a summer webinar series. This focus now is what do I do? How do I get around and doing it? And we will have another speaker who has also experienced trauma and is now working to help other parents and children. And that is next month, I think. Stay tuned to our advertisements or postings. I guess they're advertising. It's free. It's the greatest advertisement you can have to let you know what's happening throughout the rest of this summer. Godwin, thank you very much for coming here.
Thank you.
What a delight. Melissa, Jane, thank you, and thank you to the audience. Take care, folks.